Hello and good morning. It is Wednesday, December 18th. My name is Rob. I am that developer dad, and we are playing with C Sharp and .NET. Well, I say playing, I'm doing work stuff, not for a job that pays me a paycheck, but for getting ready to release a little thingy do that I created a couple of months ago that at least a few friends want to get their mitts on and actually use and pay me to use, and to make it so that they can pay me to use it, and so that people that I don't know can pay me to use it without me having to be glued to my laptop doing Active Directory user creates and group assignments and quota uh, delivering and all of that crap. I'm writing a back end piece of software that's going to hopefully either do that for me completely or at least make it a whole lot easier for me to do it when I have to step in and do something manually. So last week we did a whole bunch of frameworky stuff. I solved some sort of overarching problems I have with typical software creation. I don't like when I have to search for things. I don't like get this thing by that attribute and get this thing by this other attribute and so on and so forth. So I created a filter concept that allows me to filter some collection of some type of object by property values on that object almost automatically. We're not using it a whole lot in here because we're typically only retrieving specific things. And those types of calls usually manifest as, say, a load type thing. I'll show you a example interface. So here's the main screen focus. So we've got save user account async, load user account async, that kind of thing. And I don't have a front end for this administrative thing yet. So having a filter on user accounts doesn't make a ton of sense at this time. Excuse me. But that's the general idea. When you're loading a specific instance of a business object, you usually know the ID. That's really the only property you need to pass in on the load thing. So I'm just doing it that way. I'll probably eventually wrap these in request and response objects and use that pattern, but today is not that day. And then I also ran into a thing where my resource access has one view of what a user account looks like. And that's what a user account looks like to the rest of the components in the system when they're retrieving it from whatever type of resource I'm using. I happen to be using Azure Table Storage. I started off using Azure SQL Database, but to get the always on behavior and the level of performance that I find acceptable, that was going to cost me hundreds of dollars a month. And right now, my revenue is zero. So I'm not willing to spend hundreds of dollars a month just to make the queries fast. So I flipped over to using Azure Table Storage instead. And that's giving me the performance I want at a price that's more than reasonable. I've got a few objects stored up in there, and I have yet to pay a penny for it. It's pretty sweet. And then, so we've got the user account resource. The account manager deals with the same kind of concept, but it looks a little different from the user account, from the resource version of the user account. It's called a customer profile. It's got a lot of the same properties, but they might be named differently. They might have slightly different shapes and so on and so forth, but they're just different views of the same thing. And writing pages and pages and pages of extension methods was getting really tired. and very time consuming and really boring. So I wrote a domain object mapper at the last half of last week, and we've got this concept of a domain entity. And this domain entity is very abstract. I do have entities defined in my application, in my program framework, but those entity definitions are nothing more than, let's open it up this way because it doesn't want to find it that way. We'll go to domain constants. Let's take a look at the application user. These entity concepts are just string constants. That's all they are. And what these things do, by decorating my different components types, where a customer profile is a reflection of an application user, as is that the user account profile, or sorry, user account resource, and decorating the properties that are just reflections of attributes of those domain entities, I can very easily reduce the amount of manual mapping code I have to write by, so far, not quite 100%. So that's made me very, very, very happy that I no longer have to mess with that stuff. I do have to do this class decoration, but determining what these domain entities are and what their properties or what the attributes might be named or whatever, the naming doesn't matter. The property names from one class to the next can be completely different. The class names can be completely different because they're just idiomatic types that are specific to the component in which they're used. And this has let me just eliminate, like I said, hundreds of lines of code from my solution. And as I go, it's going to eliminate the need to write hundreds of lines of code that don't exist yet. I'm sure I'm going to run into some scenarios where this concept won't work well. And when I do, I can always fall back on writing a quick extension method to do that special mapping that the domain object mapper can't handle. And that's fine. A big bonus here is I own that code. That code is mine. I know what it does. I know how it works. I can debug it if I find a problem. I can extend it if I come up with a new thing, a new type of mapping that it can do. And this code, the filtering code, are both in the system framework that's currently under the MIT license, but I was recently advised to move that to the Apache 2.0 license. I'm going to do that as soon as I figure out how to replace the license in a GitHub repository. But I'm keeping them open source and under some form of a Creative Commons license, at least for the framework code. And this SaaS admin application is also going to be under Creative Commons because it's sort of a real world example of all of those concepts that I introduce in my that developerdad.ifx project. So this week, I've been focusing on, we're going to come back to this user access entry provider, but the customer account manager. I've got, on Monday, I think it was Monday that I implemented or got the save account. Try to get change detail. Yeah, the store customer profile async. I got that implemented on Monday. You can see, where are we? Store customer profile. So action detail, action detail. Try to get change. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong bloody thing. Gah. So here in store customer profile, I'm just doing a little bit of, just a tiny bit of validation to make sure that the profile that came in on the request is even there. And then I'm using that domain object mapper to turn the incoming customer profile into a user account resource. And then I save it. Off it goes to Azure Table Storage. I do a little bit of validation on what comes back from that. And then I just set the save result to whatever came back, map it back to a customer profile, and send it back to whoever called me. And I think it was yesterday or the day before that I introduced an iValidator. I do need to do some refactoring to retrofit that concept into my account manager. I'll show you how that worked in a second when we review what I was doing in the Entra provider yesterday. And yesterday afternoon, I spent pretty much the entire session arguing with the Microsoft Graph.NET SDK. It was a saga, let me tell you, because the Microsoft Graph is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly flexible, but power and flexibility comes at a cost. Microsoft had to build that SDK so that basically anybody who's using that SDK to interface with their Microsoft 365 tenant or an Entra tenant or what have you, it needs to be flexible enough to fit just about any use case any enterprise or any developer could come up with in regards to M365 or Entra or Azure Active Directory, which is now called Entra. And that flexibility comes with a cost. And I need you to remember this and keep this in mind when you are working on your own code and trying to make some component or class or function universally applicable to any kind of scenario that might have to use that code. You'll reach a point where it becomes so difficult to consume whatever it is you've made flexible that it actually almost feels easier to just for somebody else to just say, oh, to heck with this. I'm going to write my own copy of this function that's tailored to my needs, because the setup and the execution and the handling of the result and the weird way I have to talk to the function and so on and so forth is so complicated that it's just too much for my brain to handle. So I'm just going to roll my own. So getting the groups for the user is just a simple query. All we have to do here, and it's kind of annoying that I had to do it as 2 calls, but whatever. So I've got my user ID. I've already got him. I just call out to msgraph users member of, and that brings back a bunch of directory objects that I can then turn into groups. And here, I only care about the Entra groups whose display name starts with this app group prefix, because of course we're administering the DM's familiar. I only care about the application groups that are relevant to the DM's familiar. And up in Entra, I'm prefixing any of those Entra groups with app-gm tools- and then whatever the group is for. And that identifies those groups as being exclusively useful to the DM's familiar application. And then I return those. And that was fairly simple. Now, adding memberships, that's where I started to, that's where I hopped on the struggle bus. And memberships added. Oh, that's not what I wanted. You silly goose. Let's come back here. So add to user groups. looking at this code now, it's ridiculously simple. I had to create a reference create object, which could have been named better. And that reference create object needed the OData reference to the user that I'm adding to the group. Excuse me. Of course, I just MS Graph Client, groups, grab this group by its ID. I need the members of the group, and we're going to add a reference, and we're going to post, which means write a new reference, this reference create, which points at the user. And just the way I had to go about figuring that out was not direct or simple. Luckily, the documentation of Microsoft Learn was significantly better than what the Copilot application of Bing is for. Groups for user. Where's my implementation of remove? Let's go here. Here it is. And this is the same idea. We get the group, we get the members, we grab the reference to the user ID, or we grab the reference that lives in the members collection, and we just delete that reference. Only delete the reference. Make sure you're only deleting the reference, otherwise you will delete the user. Pardon me, goodness. It's very foggy out here where I'm at. It looks like Silent Hill or Ravenloft outside right now, and it's making me do an asthma. So there we go. That's the bottom line for my journey to Entraville, or my journey back to Entraville. What makes dealing with Entra or Active Directory or MS Graph even more frustrating is I only need to deal with it once, twice a year-ish. And every time I go to deal with it, the SDKs changed significantly from the last time. So that always takes the frustration factor and cranks it up to 11. But we've gotten past it. Reconcile membership response. I just added whether or not we completed the reconcile, how many memberships or how many groups we added the user to, how many groups we removed them from, and that's it. I'm going to use that for logging or monitoring later on. I don't need it right now. Customer Account Manager. Let's come back. So, reconcile the authorization groups. We got that licked yesterday. Handle the result. We're just going to make sure if the response has errors, we're going to set the payload to false because the payload on this guy is right now it's just a nullable Boolean. And otherwise, if there's no errors after we do all of the things, we're going to set the payload to true and return the response. So this is the saving the modified account back to storage. And I'm wondering if I should do the reconcile before the save. And then of course up here, we're doing a little bit of validation. Try to get the change detail from the subscription action. In here, we're doing a little bit more validation on the actual thing that comes in on the request itself. Save account profile request. What even? Oh, try get change detail. Duh. So we've got the managed subscription request. We've got the subscription action detail as an out parameter, and we're returning a list of service error. And all this does is some validation. And then if we get through all of the validations, we return we set the detail, which is our out parameter, to whatever the action detail is on the request, return our errors collection, and we're back to the main method. Man, I am having a time keeping my brains in my skull this morning. So there's a bunch of validation stuff. We get the change detail or the action detail out here. And then we build our profile request. We go and get our customer profile. Here it is. And we need the user identity ID for the later reconcile. We have to get it for the identity vendor because a customer profile may have multiple user identities. And once I'm done, we'll have multiple user identities because they're going to have an identity in Entra. They're also going to have an identity at Lemon Squeezy, which is the merchant of record that I'm going to be using, and they assign their own customer IDs. But I need to keep track of that customer ID here so that when I query Lemon Squeezy's APIs for information about that customer and the subscription and so on and so forth, I can send the ID that they expect. I'm not going to require them to reconcile some arbitrary ID that I've created and send to them. That would be silly. They're not going to write software for me for free. So we got our subscription template resource, and we don't have to translate that into a local idiom because this is just a template. It can exist as a resource. We're not actually going to be performing any work on the template itself. We're going to be just reading from it. And it's enough that we have the data in memory at this point. And then we are to the work that we're going to begin today. Before we dive in, because what needs to happen here is still a little bit abstract in my own head, I'm wondering if I should maybe refactor some of this goop out into private functions just to compress the amount of space that this method takes up and to reduce the amount of scrolling we have to do to get to the interesting code. And I think the answer to this is likely going to be a yes. So we're in our managers. We've got some internals. As you can see, our account manager extensions earlier this week, the thumb on the scroll bar on the file map thing was itty bitty, and I could scroll for days. We are down to exactly one method in this extension methods class, and all it does is take in a subscription template and build a subscription, like a customer subscription object for it. That's pretty dang sweet. So there's that. Build profile request. That's just a request model for the customer builder. Here's the class that does the building. And I'm not really going to mess with that. Really, this builder, I should extract an interface and turn it into an engine. But I'm not going to be using this builder outside of the context of my account manager, so it doesn't make sense to do that. I've just got some constants for the builder errors. Private async, private async, private async, public async, load or build. Here's my new thingy. Before we get into this, let's do this just purely for readability purposes. Pound region, private load or build customer methods. Pound and region. We'll just put a comment on there so I can tell where my region ends. Public async task of. I think we're going to go with the customer profile response. And excuse me. Definition on this. Subscription action detail. Profile ID, activity name, request source, customer ID source, subscription SKU. Okay. Apply. No. Perform subscription activity. We are going to accept a modify subscription request data. We're going to have to add a class called modify subscription request. We're going to need another class called modify subscription. I'm going to spell it right. Modify subscription data. It is going to have customer profile, it is also going to have a subscription action detail, change detail, save. So subscription change guys, not so worried about that. Change detail. We'll do that, and we're not doing that. We are going to require customer change detail. There we go. We'll get rid of that goop. Goodbye. And this isn't going to get serialized around or anything like that, so I'm fine with having no or default constructor on this. And now I got to come over here, go to definition. It is going to be operation request of type modify subscription data. Let's save it. It'll turn into red code in a minute. Excuse me. Profile response equals new with request data. And I can't call that request data. Rename the symbol. It is the request object. Save. And request.payload.customerProfile. Payload may be null. New customer profile. There. Now we're all type safe. And I want to get rid of the complainer code. Return the response. That's fine. I'm okay with that. This, I should probably rename that symbol too while I'm at it. Just back to request. Okay. So now it's complaining. First, we'll implement the abstract class. We'll implement the constructor. Generate that. This guy doesn't need to be public. Just going to be internal. Modify subscription data, same deal. I don't want outsiders building this object. I don't want outsiders seeing this object and thinking it's something they need to worry about. Now I'm going to take this public override string operation name, pop you up here. Is operation name modify subscription. Yeah, I like that. Data payload equals null, base parent, and that works. I like it. Now, I've created a couple more of these request objects, and I don't know if I've used that constructor or not. I should probably take a look. If I did, they'd be over here in the resource access. Not there. in my abstractions, load identity request. It's taking the parent. Good. Reconcile membership request is taking the workload name, and I want to be generate constructor using parent payload. There we go. Save. There's a big honking dog wandering around in my yard. I just caught his big fluffy tail. All right. Let's find the references to this fella. Customer account manager. Bounce over here. Reconcile groups request. Action request.workload name. We're going to pass in the action request. And then we're going to get all kinds of yummy stuff back. So cool. I'm a build right now. Build the solution. And I do have some build errors. Response.payload. Reconcile membership result and bool. All dot completed. I thought I used completed for that. Nope, I used succeeded. I'm going to rename this to completed. That's better. Async method lacks a wait. That's fine. We'll get to it. I'm going to rebuild again. Rebuild. All right. Now, I said in my description and the tweet and the blue sky cloud that I emitted at the beginning as I was getting ready to stream that we were going to talk about a gang of four pattern. Dot var change response equals, now account builder, I believe. Yep. So this is how I got my customer builder back. Let's bounce back to where we were. Dot perform subscription activity on the change request object that we haven't created yet. Var change rec data equals, I don't like using var when I know what I'm instantiating. Modify subscription data equals new. And I have to pass because I don't have a default constructor. I need the profile. And the action detail. And that's that. Customer profile, not null here. Oh, it might be null, but we know it's not null here. Action detail, it's not null here either. Modify subscription data. I want to make sure those aren't expecting null values because they cannot receive null values. we create a modify subscription request. Change request equals new, and we're going to build it from, we're going to take the metadata from the action request and apply it to the new request object. And we're going to pass in the change rec data that we created on line 197. And then we're going to pass this. All right? If change response dot has warnings. Do we have a has warnings on here? I really thought I did add a has warnings. What's the type on that? Customer profile response. Let's come up to my IFX. Into the service model. My filter. Operation response. Add error, add errors. Has warnings. It absolutely does. Duh. I have to await it. Because it was trying to find a task.result, a property called task.result, or has warnings on task.result. Duh. Dot add errors. And then we accept a operation response object, change response. Or else, change response dot has errors. We're going to copy those over. If response dot has errors, we're going to set the payload to false, return the response. And this perform subscription activity is not going to write the updated customer profile back to storage, because we do that somewhere down here. Actually, we do that next. Excuse me. Golly. Okay. Change response dot has warnings. We can add the errors. Set payload to false and return the response. Otherwise, if change response dot payload is null, the change subscription activity did not return a result. Error kind is no change result. We'll add it, set the payload to false, and fail. We have not yet saved any changes. We are good. If it's not null, this is kind of redundant. Get out of here. Now, if response dot has warnings, we'll propagate them over. Add errors from the change response. And it's change response, not okay. There we go. Save. Now I want to rename response because this is starting to get ambiguous. We're doing a lot of request response in here. So I'm going to rename this to this response. There we go. And that should disambiguate reconcile result. I should change this to reconcile response. And if you've been following along with me for any amount of time, you're starting to see that I'm using service-oriented language. Even with my internal subsystem components. And there's a reason for that. And it's because I've learned to think about and even treat internal components of my software as if they are discrete services. That's a thought process that got installed in my head by the folks at iDesign.net, in particular Yuval Lowy, who has written several books on service orientation. He also wrote a fantastic book called Writing Software. And I'm not affiliated with iDesign or Yuval at all. I am one of his past students, and that's where the relationship begins and ends. I've got immense respect for his thinking and writing and teaching in the field of software architecture. I've adopted the ideas that I've come to understand, and I'm still working on understanding an awful lot more of his ideas. I haven't adopted those yet. But I spend a lot of brain power thinking about what he's written and what he says. By subscription, we build up the request data, we create the request object, feed it the payload, copy the metadata from action request into the change request, and we fire that into perform subscription activity and get back the change response. Analyze the change response for errors. There's that disambiguation coming in to save my bacon. And I'm even going to rename these further. Change subdata. Rename to change subscription request. Rename that to change subscription response. There we go. So if the change subscription response has errors, if it has warnings, we copy them over. If change subscription response.payload is null, we generate a new service error and add it to this response. As you can see, and then we can fall through. Well, not yet. customer profile equals change subscription response dot payload. And then we flow through. So let's go take a look at perform subscription activity. I've done a whole lot of yapping and talking through and a little bit of renaming to make my code clearer to read, even if it takes up many more characters than it did before. This guy, he's tagged as async, but we're not doing anything async yet. But that's okay. Pardon me. Perform subscription activity. Well, I guess the first thing validate the request. A lot of the code we want for this is no, because we're doing all of that request validation to keep us from having to do a bunch of mucking around. So we know that none of the things on here are null. Customer profile to update equals, not the response payload, request dot payload dot customer profile. We know it's not null. If request is null or request.payload is null, response.addError, subscription activity requires modify subscription request with a customer profile with a modify subscription data payload. Customer builder performs subscription activity, argument null error. And I think I've got a malformed request. Error kinds. Yep, service error kinds dot request validation. That works. Okay. Subscription activity, subscription action detail equals, I believe I called that change detail. Yep. I can probably even get rid of those null forgiving operators. I don't like those. I don't like them at all. All right, so next thing I need is customer subscription to update equals profile to update dot subscription. And this guy might be null. If perform subscription activity requires a customer profile with a subscription. Customer builder errors, subscription not found, no. The error kind will be, and I'm going to just go ahead and use a magic string for this. I'm going to use service error kinds dot payload validation customer subscription. Was null. All right, return response, we're good. Make sure that the subscription to update is the same one. Not necessarily. Var subscription template resource template equals and it's not going to be subscription to update.skew, but action detail. What should I call it? Change detail? Action detail. Action detail dot subscription skew. And I gotta spell template resource correctly. Here we go. If, pardon me, template is null, we have to add a service error. Could not locate the subscription template with skew, action detail, subscription, blah, 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 blah. Service error kinds. There's another one in here. Step failed. And it's perform subscription activity. Substep. Load subscription template. And I don't need to say perform subscription activity here. I can just say load subscription template. Prepare working variables. String current step equals prepare working variables. Request payload validation. That's fine. Get catalog item async. Current step equals load subscription template. Boop. And step failed has a colon in it. Current step, apply subscription activity. And customer subscription, updated subscription equals apply change. It is going to accept the subscription update, the action detail, and the template. And I'm going to change template to subscription template. Let's give myself some space down here. Pound region, private, perform subscription activity methods. Pound region, nope, end. Paste. Private. This method is a big old messy mess. I love your lack of confidence in yourself, GitHub Copilot. It's doing all kinds of goofy stuff. This is doing all kinds of goofy stuff. Customer subscription, updated, equals new. All right, so we'll start off with that. Return updated. Actually, we're not going to return updated yet. We're going to copy it because I'm feeling spicy. We'll likely remove this before too long. Now, I said we're going to play around with some Gang of Four patterns. And I was originally thinking we'd have a strategy pattern for the different kinds of changes. So I'm going to add a new folder. And it's going to be subscription strategies. And we're going to have a new class called Change Strategy Factory. All right. We're going to add a new file, class, Change Strategy Base, and it's going to be internal abstract. And it is going to have one method. All right. Let's come up to Change Strategy Base and paste this bad boy in here. It's going to be public and abstract. We're going to get rid of this crap. Bye. And we need to, of course, add some namespacey poos. There we go. And that's really it. We're also going to have public abstract string activity name get. And is that what I called it? I believe it's up here in my SAS effects. Close up the domain contracts and subscription change kinds. Activity kind. Yeah. Let's just call it kind. Activity kind. All right. Save. So there's our change strategy base. Let's come back into our change strategy factory. Public class, change strategy factory. Public static get change strategy. String activity kind. And it needs to be change strategy base. It's going to return a change strategy base. Get rid of these. And this guy is going internal. Private dictionary of string change strategy base. Okay, we've already instantiated the dictionary, so change strategies dot add and what's it called again? Subscription change kinds dot create and new create subscription strategy. And of course, we need to add it. Subscription strategies and new file class create subscription strategy. Inherits change strategy base. Implement the abstract class. This guy returns subscription change kinds dot create. And now what are you complaining about? There we go. What is it complaining about still? Fix using Copilot, debugger display attribute. What are you? Oh, needs to be internal. Duh. As a matter of fact, we could probably even take that modifier out. Save. There we go. Now, get change strategy. Instead of this switch, change strategy base. Strategy equals change strategy change strategies dot try get value, and this doesn't return a change strategy base, it returns Boolean. Try get value, activity kind out change strategy base, and I'm just going to do one of these. If equals true, return the strategy. Otherwise, we're going to throw a new not implemented exception. Actually, we're going to pass a not supported exception. A change strategy for activity kind is not yet been supported. Okay. And that's all we got to do here. So get change strategy. Let's come back out to the customer builder. And instead of apply change, I'm just going to 86 this. That can go bye-bye. And we can get rid of all of this extra empty lines. here, var change strategy equals well, instead of new change strategy factory being down here, I'm going to leave that red code there. Customer builder is going to get private read-only change strategy factory. Excuse me. Change strategy factory equals new. We're just going to build this guy up on instantiation of the customer builder. Dot get change strategy for action detail dot activity kind. Now this guy might throw an error. So I'm thinking instead of get change strategy, let's come up to the definition here. We'll make it a nullable change strategy base. Hey, C Films, how's it going, buddy? Return null. But I am going to inject an iLogger private iLogger logger, and we'll make this guy nullable just in case. Logger equals logger. Save. And down here, string log message equals the change type activity kind was requested but is not yet supported. And logger.log error, log message, and return null. Save. Out to the customer builder. If change strategy is null, there's service error, could not locate a change strategy, a strategy implementation for activity name. It's an error. Perform subscription activity. Service error kind. Step failed. We're on our current step. Return response. We're good. We should probably response.payload equals profile to update. To update. No changes made. then down here, change strategy dot apply change. And we pass in the subscription update, action detail, and the subscription template. And now, we've still got some, the compiler's still whining at me. What are you whining about? Oh, I need to pass a logger. Duh. Pardon me. Suppose I should inject a logger into this guy, shouldn't I? Logger equals null. Change strategy factory equals new, pass in the logger. I'm going to go out to the customer builder. On the actual application, not yet. I'm still pushing forward with my administrative app. And right now, the administrative app is either to, at least for a customer who has established an identity with the system, it's able to load the identity information and build a starter profile with the default free subscription type. I still need to hook in to make sure that that user is then placed in the correct Entra groups, but I added the facility to do that, to perform a reconcile between what they've got and what they should have. I added that capability to my identity system component yesterday. So I'll link that in later. It's actually on my mental to-do list. Then I got the save user profile, like for when changes come in from outside. And I'm working through the managed subscription thing. And in so doing, I am demonstrating a factory pattern and a strategy pattern, which is fun. So we've got a finite list of possible changes that can be made to a customer subscription. Those are listed nope, not here, but here as constants. And I'm adding those constants to a static string array here of allowed values for validation and stuff like that. So create, renew, expire, cancel, suspend, resume. And that's a boatload of possible changes, right? And I'm sure you can imagine that the code, if I were to just use like a switch case type thing, would be absolutely nightmarish. So like, just for example, private void, apply change, switch, string activity kind, case, subscription change kinds dot create. That is a constant value. Oh, just a syntax error. Reams of code to affect a create subscription change. Case, cancel, reams of code to affect a cancel subscription change. And eventually you can imagine that this apply change method gets ridiculously complicated and hard to read and hard to navigate around and just a giant source of curse words. So I was like, what if? Because for every single one of those types of changes that we want to apply, I mean, we can distill it down to just an apply change type thing, right? Like a single method that each of those has in common. Apply change. And it's going to accept the subscription to update, the action detail. That has the details of what about that subscription needs to be changed, as well as the template for the subscription for the subscription type that's identified in the action detail, so that we can pull the values out that we need to be able to make the changes as we go. And then I created, so that's a base class. And I've got a create subscription strategy. Now it's not implemented yet, but all the code to apply the create subscription is going to live in here. And that's the only reason I would ever need to change this class, is for if I need to change the way I create a subscription from a template. That's it. That's the whole shebang. There's another thing that I need to add in here, and it's iValidators for this whole thing. Because there are going to be certain rules when we're creating a subscription that apply to certain scenarios. So inside my internals, I'm going to need a lot more thought before I go ahead and add that concept, because I'm not quite sure what I'm validating yet. And the existing iValidator isn't really going to cut it for what I think I need to do. So I might just make that into private methods. Private list of service error, validate data. And validates that the current subscription is in an appropriate state for the requested action and provided template. The customer's current subscription state. Subscription state details for the action to perform on the subscription. And I should probably accept the template. Template for the subscription type described in the action detail. Right now, I was just going to throw a not implemented. That's fine. This guy throws a not implemented. Now, as I work through these, I'm probably going to find some commonalities and be able to pull this out into a more cohesive interface. And I'm already predicting that I need to turn this into a request response type pattern here so that I can return either the updated subscription or the collection of service errors as we encounter them. But I'm going to think about that for the next hour and a half, and I'm going to try to get some lunch of some sort into me and everything like that, and come back at 1, and we're going to implement the first of our strategies for activity kind create. And we're going to start off brainstorm the rules we should check when creating a new subscription. There we go. And I will see you all at around 1 o'clock Eastern time when I return. It might be a couple of minutes later. We'll see. But yeah, I need to take a break. So until then, take care of yourselves. Grab some lunch, grab some coffee, take a break, look at something far away to give your eyes a rest, and try to do something nice for somebody, even if that somebody is just you. Until next time, happy coding.